Welcome to Spring 2014 Snow Day Counseling Techniques. So I'm recording this video while I'm working at home, so you're going to hear a variety of very interesting noises, including traffic noise, children, a dog. Please hang in there with me while we get through this. This video has an accompanying PowerPoint presentation on Blackboard that is exactly what this video is, slide by slide. So obviously you're welcome to go ahead and print that up either as individual slides, or you can print it up as notes pages, so you have several slides on one page, and you can print them in black and white so you don't end up using up all of your ink. This podcast is made for you to be able to stop, go get something to eat, whatever you need to do, rewind it, watch it again, no problem. So this is pretty much individualized as to what you need at the moment. We're going to talk about the 5 stages of the helping process and then the environment that we're going to try to create for our clients in this particular video. So the first thing that we have to do in the first step here is to establish a working relationship with your client. The idea is that your client needs to feel comfortable, right, with you. It's very difficult for a client to walk in and meet somebody, a complete stranger, and then say all of these personal things to them. So as a counselor, it is important for us to help that client feel comfortable. We do this by creating a relationship that allows the client to tell their story using all of the basic skills that you're going to learn in this course. We create a climate for change by accepting the client for who they are, where they are. And by doing that, we create a working relationship. So we are not the expert. The counselor is not the expert in the client's life. We might have a clear understanding of counseling and counseling skills, but the only expert in the client's life is the client. The other thing is we spend a lot of time during that first stage educating the clients on informed consent, on confidentiality, reasons we breach confidentiality, all those kinds of things. And we're going to get to those actually next week. Problems. And a lot of beginning counselors believe that this means trying to fix the client's problems or issues or concerns, and that's not accurate. We're still building up this relationship and spending a lot of time just trying to get to know who the client is. So we're continuing to create a therapeutic climate so that the clients will be open to speak to us, which is why for the first half of this class, you're not going to be allowed to ask questions in your main sessions, because when clients are asked a barrage of questions, they feel like they're under the spotlight. But when we use basic counseling skills, paraphrasing, summarization, silence, all of the things that you're going to learn the first 5 or 6 weeks of this class, the client really feels heard. They believe they've been heard, and it makes a much more comfortable atmosphere. This is a working relationship rather than a I know what to tell you to do. Right? During this stage, when we're trying to figure out who the client is, we're striving to understand the social and cultural context of the client's problem or issue. I don't always like using the word problem, but that's what you're going to see a lot of and read a lot of. We don't blame the victim, regardless of whether we believe it is a problem or not, or we think it is serious or not. It is serious to the client, and we need to respect that. We conduct an initial assessment. Now, in schools, this is done by just having conversation with the client. In a more clinical environment, there may actually be a set of forms that need to be filled out. But regardless, we don't just sit there and ask a lot of questions. We want to know from the client's point of view what's going on with them and what they would like to do to help themselves or what they would like to get out of counseling. The other thing we do, because we're from a wellness model, is we want to figure out what works for the client or what has worked in the past. So we will ask, when has this problem resolved itself, or when has it not occurred? Or give me an example of when you were able to go to a family function and not feel so isolated, those kinds of things. Stage 3 is helping a client create goals. Now, generally we talk about goals even in the first session, but to really create a hammer down goals, we have to have a relationship with the client so that the client really is able to open up with us. And so sometimes it takes several sessions, sometimes it takes longer depending on the client. We help clients gain a focus by narrowing down the task of what they want to do. So I want to get along with everybody in my family. That's great. That's a fantastic goal. But let's start with something small. Let's start with something a little more doable and something measurable. The goals need to be specific, and you need to be able to know when this client has accomplished it, right? So the client could say, okay, I want to be able to go to one of my niece and nephew's birthday parties, spend an hour there, and feel comfortable in who I am in that moment, and be able to spend an hour there without wanting to run out the door. Great. That's a very measurable goal. Okay. As the client begins to work on their goals and figure out their goals, we're going to refine them together. And an example was what I just said. Wow, that's a great goal. That sounds like a fantastic thing, but that's really huge. Let's narrow it down a little bit. Stage 4 is encouraging clients to explore what's going on with themselves and their issues and their concerns, and to take action. This does not mean we tell them what to do. It does not mean we give them advice, because counselors do not do that. But help the client make some decisions for themselves on what they want to do. So sometimes we confront the clients with care and respect. Dr. Glossoff calls them carefrontations, and we're going to talk about that later on. But basically, we're noting inconsistencies. For example, you might say to a client, so what I hear you saying is that you really want to go to your niece's birthday party and spend an hour there and have conversations with your family. But the other thing that I'm hearing is that you're going to walk in saying, okay, everybody's out to get me, and I better protect myself. Those two things don't seem to match for me. Let's talk more about that. That is a confrontation. Confrontation is noting inconsistencies that a client is stating in a caring way that helps the client really explore what's going on with them. Self-disclosure is something that we tend to use very rarely, especially beginning counselors, but you're going to see in the person-centered video. The counselor uses self-disclosure, and I want you guys to note that, because it's more of, this is what I see going on in this counseling relationship. That is a self-disclosure of what the counselor is believing, thinking, what's going on in that moment, versus, oh yeah, I had the same problem with my family. That is not an appropriate disclosure, because it won't help the client in any way. All it will do is make the focus back on the counselor. We identify ways to accomplish the goals. So tell me what you've done in the past that has worked. Tell me what you've done in the past that hasn't worked. All right, so it sounds to me like if you go in there and you know you're only going to be an hour, you can take some nice deep breaths, and that seems to really help you. Let's come up with some other things that might help you get through that family situation, things that might have worked in the past. The other part of that is maybe we can talk about some stress management techniques before you go in and after you leave to help alleviate some of the stress that you have from being in a family situation. You develop and assess action strategies. So the client goes to the niece's birthday party. The client tries some things. The client comes back. Then you have nice discussions about what that process was like, what it was like going there, what were you thinking, what were you feeling. Tell me about that, what that was like for you. And in that process of the client describing that hour or that day or whatever it is, you will get clear information on what the client did, what worked in the strategies, and what didn't work. And then you can talk to the client a little bit more about changing that for the next time, and then carry out that action program. Okay, we're going to learn this stress management technique. We're going to do these things to help you work through going to this family outing. The last stage in counseling is termination, which is where we bring closure to the client's work, help them understand what they've learned, help them develop a plan to continue this process. And that the majority of that is completed at the last session. However, termination is a process throughout counseling from the moment you begin. Creating goals helps towards termination. Helping a client become independent helps them work and move along without us so that they don't need us so much, because the idea is us to work out of a job, right? So in the first session, you want to provide a relaxing, open atmosphere. You discuss your definition of counseling, which you'll be writing later in this semester, and you'll discuss confidentiality, which again we're going to do next week. You're going to gather data. You're not trying to solve the problem. You are trying to get as much information as possible without asking 5,000 questions about what's going on with your client. Then you're going to let your client vent, because sometimes, nobody's listened to them, or maybe everybody's listened to them and they've gotten tired of listening. But regardless, the client needs to vent. They need to get that information out. And you're going to use all of the basic attending skills that you're going to learn in this course. So when you begin a session, a lot of times students say, what do I say? How do I begin it? You can say anything like, nice to see you. What would you like to talk about today? Tell me what happened this week. Thank you for coming. Have a seat and relax a bit. Let's take a deep breath. Sometimes if you want to say hello to the client before you've talked about confidentiality, so you don't want the client to actually say anything that might cause you to breach confidentiality, you might say, so tell me what parking was like, oh man, or how did you find the place, or thanks so much for coming in, or I appreciated your call, or I enjoyed speaking with you on the phone. Let me talk to you a little bit about counseling. You do not, and this is a personal pet peeve of mine, you do not say what brought you here today, because as the pictures show, clients, and not being facetious, they will absolutely do this completely honestly, trying to answer your question, especially children, will say, what brought you here today? And they'll say, my mama, the bus, the car, the train, I walked. And then you've got to say, oh, okay, yeah, that's not what I meant. So instead of embarrassing clients from the get-go, let's just start off with something that's much more open and much more caring. So how do you behave as a counselor? You need to obviously dress professionally. So when you're doing your midterm and your final videotape, you don't have to wear a suit or anything, but cutoffs and low-cut shirts and shirts that are buttoned down, open, not buttoned, things like that. Baseball caps, that would not be appropriate, obviously. You need to take a deep breath and begin your session and remain calm at all times. You need to find a way to ground yourself. And for everybody, that's different. For me, it's just sitting there, taking a deep breath, imagining roots growing into the ground. Because I ground myself, I become calm. When you are in that session with that client, nothing else needs to exist. So whatever else is going in your life has to be put on the back burner. You have to focus on the client. And when you're working full time, that means you're focusing on clients 7 hours, 8 hours. It's extremely exhausting. So you've got to find a way to ground yourself. Do not ever overreact to client statements. Find what we call your counselor face, which is your, okay, sure, without going, what? That face is not appropriate. Even though you can't see my face, you probably had an idea of what I just did. Use silence. Very purposely don't say things, because that will continue to encourage the client to talk. Limit your movements. I tend to be a hand talker, and I have to be very particular about that. You're going to sit with a nice open position, which we're going to talk about next week. You're going to smile appropriately. So when a client tells a joke that is accurate and funny, like why did the chicken cross the road kind of thing, it's perfectly acceptable to laugh. But a lot of times clients make jokes to demean themselves or to not have to speak seriously, and you can't laugh during those times. The other thing is, a lot of times clients and counselors smile when they're uncomfortable. You're going to have to work very hard to not smile when your client smiles because they're uncomfortable. It takes the power out of the whole situation. The other thing we show is empathy. The idea is that you have an understanding of your client's worldview. Empathy, understanding, wow, that was a really difficult situation, is very different than, oh man, I'm so sorry for you, you poor thing. That's sympathy. Clients don't want sympathy, but they do want empathy. They want to know that you understand them and who they are and where they are. So you stay focused with the client. And actually, if you watch the person-centered video that I put up, he's talking about, you're about to watch it anyway, he's talking about his wife. But the counselor consistently brings it back to him and his focus and what's going on with him. Acknowledge feelings and emotions in that moment. Wow, you really look upset about that. Let's talk more about that. Adding on implicit client messages, like the ability to go deeper. So we're going to really get into helping a client go deeper later, but it's things like using silence, using quietness, using the confrontations, using these things to help a client really think about who they are in that moment. But because you have empathy for a client, because you understand the client, the things that you say are going to be appropriate for the client. Okay? The specific behaviors that we use in counseling to help us be genuine are basic attending behaviors, appropriate eye contact, appropriate not only for you and the client, but for the client's culture, smiling when it's appropriate, a little bit of leaning forward, don't fall out of your chair, those kinds of things that let the client, those basic attending behaviors, letting the client know that you're paying attention, a little bit of head nodding and not a bobblehead. You want to make sure you don't overemphasize your role. You don't want to really push the fact that you're the counselor in here. You're trying to listen. You want to make sure that what you're projecting to the client is appropriate to who you are at that moment, right? So you want to make sure that what you say and what you do is congruent. That's the same thing with the client. You can express yourself naturally. You can laugh at funny jokes. You can go, wow, those are okay. Not every 5 seconds, but those are okay. The difference here, though, is that you're trying to express yourself in a natural way. We do not want to stand up there and be like cardboard. And again, sharing yourself for the benefit of the client, especially in terms of what's happening in session, or, wow, man, I would have been pissed off too if I had fallen into the snow and nobody helped me or whatever, I don't know. So those kinds of things, well, I do know, but anyway, those kinds of things are really important. Positive regard is showing to the client that you appreciate who they are in that moment. And sometimes for some clients, it's very difficult to find positive regard. You have to show willingness and an interest to a client. Convey that you understand what they're saying by the basic paraphrasing, repeating back what they say, those kinds of things. Again, the non-judgmental attitude, which goes along with the surprise face, right? And you don't disapprove of a client in the last video you're going to watch. You want to make sure that you are operating within your scope of practice. Since you're a beginning counselor, you don't really have a scope of practice, but you're receiving supervision. And so I, as your supervisor for this course and your supervisors for the rest of the program, will help you be competent. But if you encounter a situation with a client, not necessarily in this class, but in future classes, especially practicum and internship, that you don't know about, that's when you hit the literature. That's when you go in and look at the research and try to figure out what works with clients. Become more competent. The other thing is you can convey warmth through sometimes eye contact, gestures, sometimes touch. It depends on the situation you're in. Immediacy in terms of being in that moment at that time. Oh, that sounds like you had a really sucky day. Let's talk more about that. So one of the things that beginning counselors ask is, what do I do if I get stuck? Don't say anything. Be quiet. Be in the moment. You can summarize, you can paraphrase, but the best thing for you to do is to use silence and give your brain time to catch up with you. This is going to occur for anything that we do in class, but particularly for the snow day. If you have any questions, please feel free to either ask me in class next week, but I would prefer, since this is immediate, for you to go ahead and upload them to Blackboard under the discussion board under Questions to Professor. I hope everybody has a great night.